morning, Dr. Schuster. How you doing? Thanks for joining me this morning.
Mr. Olson, good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Really appreciate you joining this Montana Chamber of Commerce Resilience and Renaissance series, talking about the COVID-19 crisis and the pandemic and how we're getting through this. And I'm really looking forward to speaking to you today about the education piece and some of the effects that this might have on the world's youth, right? So
My pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
absolutely. If you wouldn't mind, just kind of explaining, what you're doing in Moscow, Russia now, I guess from Canada, and then give us a quick history of how you got there.
Yeah, sure. So currently I am the Deputy Director and Secondary School Principal of the Anglo-American School of Moscow, which is one of the last big embassy schools in the world. It's sponsored by the United States Embassy, the United Kingdom, as well as the Canadian Embassy. So those three embassies run the school, and they run our school board. I've been international for over 12 years. I worked in Shanghai, China for 9, in South Korea as well. And I know you from the University of Montana, where we got our undergraduate degrees.
Go Grizz.
Go Grizz, that's right. Yeah, I've been in education for about 20 years and serving in school leadership for about the last 8.
Awesome. So obviously we've known each other for a very long time. When you were in Korea, can you talk a little bit about, how you progressed through from, teaching in the high school there and then to Shanghai and give us maybe a little bit of more detail? And not a lot of people have followed your career path, you.
Yeah, so once you teach for 2 years in the United States, you qualify to teach in international schools around the globe, which serve expatriate communities and generally prepare students for American universities for the most part. There's also a British group of schools too that prepare kids for schools in England, but it's really catered to American expats living around the world. And I started there. I was an English teacher. I went back to New Jersey, my home, and started teaching there. Went overseas to South Korea, and 6 months into the job, became the high school principal at the age of 25, and never really turned back from leadership after that. And switched my perspective on things. Went back, got a master's, got certified, and then became a high school principal after that.
All right. How'd you get from Korea to Shanghai?
Well, once you get out on the circuit and you start working in those international schools, there's a whole network of people that you're in contact with, and job openings are posted, and you just go for them in different locations.
Awesome. Well, it's been fun. It's been fun joining you on some of your journey. So I really appreciated it. And a lot of times when we talk, we talk about having to train kids for jobs in technologies that haven't even been invented yet. And how do you do that, right?
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing about education right now is the world is changing so quickly, and it's our responsibility as educators to prepare them for a world that doesn't exist. You said that very well. So one of the things that's always on the forefront of my mind is relevancy of what we're doing. Like, are we teaching the things that are relevant for students to know and be productive members of society when they get not only done with high school, but then university as well? So we're not just preparing them for the next level, we're trying to give them skills they're going to need for the rest of their life.
Right. And before this crisis, through the Montana Chamber of Commerce, we heard from business leaders across the state that one of the big things that was missing was the interpersonal skills, the screen addictions, right? And that the STEM pendulum had maybe swung a little bit too far, and the kids were very proficient in that, but they weren't able, with the critical thinking and the problem solving and the systems thinking. So how do you go from a traditional education model, right, where you're in your desk for 45 minutes, right? The whole world changed in the last 2 months, distance learning, remote learning. But how do we shift from that old industrial age schooling to the information age schooling?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's what keeps me awake at night,
right?
Trying to solve the answer to that question. I think it's the way we structure our classes, for one. I mean, getting into distance education is a topic all to itself, but even before we get to that part, just creating opportunities for students to work together, to be grading them not only on content, but also on the skills that you just mentioned, the ability to think critically, the ability to work with others. I mean, that is a huge, huge piece to be able to effectively work on a high performing team, to be a member of a high performing team.
Yep.
Think how much better our businesses would run, and I think about like leadership in schools if we had high performing teams in every aspect of the organization. And I'm sure you've been part of teams that have been very productive, as well as teams that have struggled for various reasons.
Yep.
So I think it's the way we structure classes. Yeah, you still need to know how to write an essay and do research, but how often do you really do that when you get into the workforce versus being able to be a productive member of a meeting, problem solve, and come up with ways to partner with others that are efficient. So
Right.
I think the way we structure our classes and the way we assess students, what we're assessing them on, traditionally it was just content. Now we have to shift and start assessing them on all these other skills that we really value.
Right. And I talk to my kids quite regularly about the fact that the entirety of human intelligence resides in a device that fits in the palm of your hand. You can keep everything that humans know is in your pocket, right? So, how have you found successfully to teach kids, whether in Shanghai or Moscow, to use the internet and to use the access to that data to do other things with their education or with their interests?
Well, I think a lot of it is making them independent learners in a way that, we really didn't have to do. For instance, when you used to get something like a phone, it would come with a huge instruction booklet
Right.
back in the day.
That's right.
It doesn't come with anything now.
That's right. I never thought of that.
Yeah. How do you use an iPhone? It doesn't come with a booklet. There's no instruction manual in your iPhone box. You have to go online, you have to watch videos, you have to figure things out. Putting that in a classroom context. So I taught high school English for 10 years before I got into administration. And the first couple of years of my career, I would stand up in front of the room and I'd say, okay, there was this guy, William Shakespeare. And for 15 minutes, I would write things on the board and explain to students who William Shakespeare was, where he was from, what he did. In the last few years of my teaching career, before I got into administration, everybody had laptops. And I'd say, okay, there's this guy, William Shakespeare. You've got 5 minutes. I don't care what year he was born or what year he died, but I want you to tell me 10 interesting things about him. You have 5 minutes to go.
Huh.
Right? Like that's a different way to teach.
Sure. Sure.
There's no reason for me to stand up there because, like you said, they all had computers at their desks or they have a phone in their pocket and they could find the answer to pretty much any question in under a minute. Right?
Yeah.
So we have to adapt the entire education system to fit into this. And that's why content is no longer as important as it used to be. Now, the thing is, where's the line? Right? Like there still has to be basic knowledge that people understand. You still need to know what the periodic table is and what it represents. But do you need to know what the number in the top right corner is and memorize that? Probably not, because you could look up the periodic table in a few minutes. Right. Or do you need to know the exact year or date in a social studies class that something happened? No, but it's probably really important that you know what caused World War I and what ended it and how that led to World War II happening, right? Like those bigger concepts are what's more important.
Okay, so to replace that fact regurgitation, right? Mm-hmm. Can you give me just one example of how you would change the way you teach something? And you kind of alluded to it just now, but just real basic, like a different way to assign them to use the knowledge.
Yeah, the biggest one we've seen is in math, and it's the biggest problem with too, because parents don't understand it. So they get all fired up about the new math curriculum because they know how to solve the problem one way and they try and help their kids with their homework and they get confused and frustrated and they think everyone in education is stupid and doesn't know what's going on. But again, what did we used to do in math? We used to memorize a series of steps, which I'm assuming you've forgotten as I have how to do. Sure. When it comes to those problems. But at the time when we were engaged in it, all we understood was what the memorization of sequence of steps was to complete an algebraic problem.
Right.
We had no idea when you actually use that in real life. In fact, I don't know about you. I was that kid in class who was like, yeah, why do we need to know how to do this? Um, but we didn't understand who actually used that kind of math. And we didn't understand why you did the things you did in the steps.
Sure.
So what math teachers have known for years, particularly at the upper levels of high school and in university, is that most students weren't good at math. They were good at a series of steps, but
Right.
because they didn't know when to use it and they didn't know why the steps were happening in the order that they were happening in, they weren't good at math.
Right.
So, when you get to calculus and upper levels, that really comes back to haunt you in the long run. You've been memorizing. Think about learning a language. You can memorize vocabulary and things, but
Sure.
if you don't know how to put it all together and why you're doing the things you're doing grammatically, you're not actually learning that language.
Right. Can't string a sentence together.
Right.
Right. That's a great analogy, Shu. Thanks. That was from the math to the language. That really, yeah, it's easy for me to understand, having spent as many years learning Japanese as I did. Right. That's a great analogy.
Thanks, man.
Uh, so what do you said, you stay up at night thinking about how this, this distance learning, this transition learning. So I alluded to it earlier that you were running the school in Moscow from Canada. Can you,
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, like, pretty much all the schools in North America right now and around the world, uh, they're in a distance learning model because it's not safe to be on campus at this point. So we were fortunate that we were in a situation where we already had what's called a learning management system, which means that every class already had an online component to it in the middle school and high school levels uh, uh, at the Anglo-American School in Moscow. And a lot of high performing high schools, even in Montana, probably have some kind of learning management system in place, whether it's Google Classroom,
Yeah.
there's things called Moodle, Canvas, there's all different ones that are used. If you've ever taken an online course at a university, you probably used one. So we were lucky that we had some infrastructure in place. My heart really goes out to those school districts that come from poor rural areas or things where, every student does not have a laptop in the room normally. And, um, people are sending home like packets of material for students to work on where, we're not in that sort of situation.
Sure.
But what we found is that what is still missing more than anything is the human component. And what the students are suffering from the most is just isolation uh, and really struggling in their own personal mental health to deal with the isolation of being in distance learning. So we're trying to learn as we go. We were fortunate that the Asian schools closed first, and then we had been in contact with them for literally months before we had to close. And we have a lot of contacts. Like I said, I used to work in China, South Korea. So many people in our business have contacts, and we were learning from them as they were struggling. And then we were able to make some adaptations and require, for instance, that there is some kind of synchronous learning that occurs where you're online at the same time as the teacher, and you encourage group work as much as possible with your peers. Because it's very easy to post an assignment, leave it, and then say, okay, you're going to turn this in a couple of days, go learn it on your own kind of thing. Like, that's one model. And then there's the model of us kind of being together as a community. And it's funny, the kids are keeping up with the academic work. They're doing a really good, actually, but it's that social interaction that they're just dying for. They really, really miss it.
Yeah.
And that's where we're hurting the most. So we're already planning for August and September when we reopen, assuming that we're going to have to do some kind of distance learning between August and January of next year. And we're trying to learn on how to increase the amount of interaction students have with one another and with their teachers.
So it's going to be that blended in-person versus distance learning. Um, I heard one thing from a potential that was floated in the state of Montana was alternating days. Half the students are there one day, half the students are there the next day, right? Just so that there's more room in the classrooms, for example, right?
We even talk about half days, so then you don't have to worry about the cafeteria and lunch and them coming together.
Okay. All
It's
right.
been really fun as a leadership challenge to just figure out all these nuances of how to do this. And being on a leadership team with the principals from the other divisions, with the head of school, the superintendent, and just trying to solve all these little problems. It's been a fascinating leadership experiment. I'm sure the businesses in Montana are all kind of dealing with the same kinds of things. How do you restructure an office? How do you do all these things? And
Absolutely.
the school is really a microcosm of a community, right?
Right.
It's its own community that represents the larger community
And that,
symbolically. So,
yeah,
yeah.
and now all the business leaders have seen what the teachers do every day, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think there's
We
unquestioned,
always get a bad rap. It's that not working 3 months a year. We always get a bad rap.
but I think I think that there might be a real psychological shift. I see it in Montana. The business and education community, I think, are going to come together a lot more closely on the other side of this, right? And as we were preparing for this conversation, we talked a little bit about those workers that lost their jobs or their companies let them go home, right? Working from home is going to be the new normal. Social, distance learning is going to be probably part of a new normal. But regarding those people that may be looking to reskill or to retrain, or
Mm-hmm.
even training our high school students for a new post-COVID world, can
Mm-hmm.
you just give me a stream of consciousness on on your perspective of that?
Yeah, we're kind of coming full circle a little bit though, because we're getting back to that relevancy piece. And when I heard you say schools and businesses working closer, I think that is essential because you hear so much about how students get into the workforce out of university and then companies have to train them almost from scratch because what they have learned has not been relevant and is not what the students need on the job. Um, and that is the worst thing we can do. We don't want students getting an education that then they can't apply when they get in the workforce. It doesn't make any sense. So we need businesses telling us more and more what they need. And we need to do things like at the high school level, bringing in more types of internship opportunities and ways to get the students to see so they can see in their mind what they need to know and what they need to do. If every high school internship ended with a goal list of these are the things you need to do this job effectively, you got 4 years of university to go get this. I
Right.
think that would set the students on a really good path because they're just in the machine, right? They don't really have a lot of agency over what the curriculum is that they're being taught and what they're doing. It's really up to the teachers and the school to make those decisions. So the more we can create those relationships between the businesses and the schools, I think schools are ready to adapt. I think schools are progressive schools anyway, are ready to meet the needs of the businesses because we want as much as anyone for the world to be a better place and businesses to be more efficient and us to solve some of the major problems we're facing. We don't want to prepare kids in a way that is irrelevant to what businesses need. We want everyone to win on this.
That's great. I hope that this is a catalyst for that. And this is what one of the things the Montana Chamber of Commerce is trying to do is take the lead, specifically around career awareness. What are all the options that are available to you? I didn't get that when I was in high school, right? What are, and the best way that we figured out how to do that so far is connecting a business leader virtually into as many Montana classrooms and now into the students' homes as well. And, you know, that's how we've decided to take the lead.
Well, and
Uh,
it's got to go further than the career day
right.
once a year.
Sure.
Here's 30 minutes with this person from this business, which is a great idea, but it has to become ingrained in the school culture. It has to be regular visits to different classes. I mean, lots of high schools run business classes. They don't have a lot of guest speakers in them. Like there should be a speaker going on through that, right?
Sure.
And again, a feedback loop needs to exist between the businesses, higher education, secondary education, that gets us adapting our curriculum because that's really what we need to do. We need to make sure our curriculum is at the forefront of what the workforce needs when they get out of school. And I think traditionally we've just been really far behind on that.
You're right. And I hope that the Montana Chamber of Commerce and the business community in Moscow, the foreign business leaders can Do you have any interaction with them there? Do you have any models or examples that you're using?
Yeah, absolutely. One is a strong internship program that I've experienced both in China and now in Russia, where we do get students that go out. And even if they find out that it's not the job for them, that sometimes is just as important
Right,
as
right.
figuring out what they do want to do.
Don't want to do.
Um, but I can tell you one great example I have is we had a aerospace engineering class at a school I worked at, and we found a local flight simulator that wasn't that had plenty of time during the school day for students to use.
Wow,
And the company that owned the flight simulator allowed us to go in and take students there and get them. It's the same flight simulator that you would get certified in the United States, but it was
huh,
so the kids couldn't get the actual certification, but they could log the hours in it. So here you had a science class that was teaching all the physics of aerospace engineering, and then you had kids learning to fly at the same time.
that's amazing.
Those kinds of connections that we're looking for, right? That's going to fuel a kid's passion to go study the things they need to study to, be productive in society later. That's what's going to take a kid who might not enjoy school that much and get them to love school, right? That's the difference.
That's awesome. I think that's a great note to end on, Dr. Schuster. I think
Awesome.
I've really appreciated all the advice and your perspective on this, and thank you very much for giving us your time today.
Well, it's anytime. It's my pleasure.
All right, take care, stay safe, stay healthy, stay resilient. Great to see you.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.